Judge Grayson thought he was sentencing a clueless teen, until the defendant started dismantling the case like a seasoned lawyer. The air inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt heavy, almost suffocating. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, whispering as they watched the scene unfold. At the defendant's table stood a young man who seemed too small for the setting, hands in his pockets, chin slightly raised, showing he wasn't afraid. Jalen Dawson, 19, accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but the way Judge Walter Grayson looked at him made it clear this trial wasn't just about the law. Grayson leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the polished wood. He peered down at Jalen over his glasses, his lips curling into a smirk. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" he said, voice laced with sarcasm. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor joined in. But Jalen didn't laugh. He didn't even flinch. He had spent years preparing for this kind of moment. Not this exact one. He never expected to stand here as a defendant, but he knew the courtroom better than most. While other kids memorized basketball stats, Jalen memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he ran mock trials in his head. His mother, Denise Dawson, had been a paralegal for over 20 years, and Jalen had grown up listening to her stories. How prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, and how some defense attorneys barely tried. By 14, he could break down a trial better than most law students. But none of that mattered to Judge Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick," Grayson sighed, flipping open the case file. "I've got a golf game at 2. The audience laughed again, but this time, something shifted. Jalen's lips curved into a faint, almost invisible smirk, because Grayson had just made his first mistake. The courtroom hadn't noticed yet. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington stood, confident and composed, the kind of man who thought he'd already won. His suit was sharp, his tie perfect, and his tone smooth. "Your Honor," he began, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught red-handed in a stolen 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers pursued him through downtown, where he attempted to flee before being caught. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence speaks for itself." The crowd murmured. It all sounded convincing. A stolen car, a chase, fingerprints. Judge Grayson nodded, glancing at Jalen. "Go on," he said. Carrington walked toward the jury box, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "The defense may try to convince you this was all a misunderstanding," he said. "That Mr. Dawson is just a victim of circumstance. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened. Grayson leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Jalen didn't blink. Carrington continued, flipping through his papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Grayson exhaled through his nose and nodded. "Sounds straightforward to me," he said. "And for most people in the room, it did. It probably did." The case looked simple: a stolen car, a chase, and an arrest. But Jalen had studied too many trials not to notice the cracks. Still, he stayed silent, watching and waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Jalen's lawyer, Lisa Thornton, a nervous public defender who had barely spoken since entering the courtroom. She stood, shifting uneasily. "Your Honor." Jalen placed a hand on her arm, a quiet signal. She hesitated, then sat back down. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor," Jalen said. The courtroom went completely silent. Grayson stared at him, surprised. "You'll what?" "I'll be defending myself," Jalen repeated calmly. A murmur spread through the room. The bailiff's eyebrows rose, and Prosecutor Carrington's smirk faltered for a second before he laughed. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Jalen stepped forward. Everything was about to change. The air grew heavier as he stood tall, hands still in his pockets. He waited just long enough to make everyone uneasy before he spoke again. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington crossed his arms. "Go ahead. You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" "That's right," Carrington replied. "And it's in his report." "Of course it is." Jalen nodded. Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence. Grayson frowned. On what grounds? Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car, Jalen said. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began. Carrington's face tensed. What are you talking about? Your Honor, Jalen continued. I'd like to request Officer Ruiz's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he saw me in the car, his location data should match. But I have a feeling it won't. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Grayson turned to Carrington. Counselor. Carrington clenched his jaw. That report was filed by a trained officer, Your Honor. Are we really trusting a defendant's word over his? Jalen shrugged. If the officer was where he said he was, the GPS will prove it. But if he wasn't, he let the words hang. Grayson studied him for a moment, then looked back at Carrington. Any issue verifying the officer's GPS logs? Carrington hesitated. It was only a second, but everyone noticed. The jury, the gallery, and the judge. Jalen took a steady breath. He knew that pause meant one thing. Carrington wasn't confident. Grayson sighed. Very well. Carrington finally said, no objections, Your Honor. But the shift had already happened. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. Carrington shuffled his papers, his calm demeanor starting to slip. Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle. Jalen nodded. That's true, he said, stepping forward. But let's talk about that evidence for a second. Grayson raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Judge Grayson leaned back slightly. Jalen turned to the jury, meeting each of their eyes. The prosecution wants you to believe that because my fingerprints were found in a car, it means I stole it, he began, his tone calm but firm. That's the story they're trying to sell. But let's think about this logically. He paused, letting the silence draw the jurors in. Say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and leave. Hours later, someone shoplifts that same jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it? A few jurors exchanged uncertain glances. Someone in the gallery muttered under their breath. Jalen didn't give anyone time to recover. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was in that store with 3 friends. When we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door. It was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it. I didn't take it, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything inside. Just a dumb moment of curiosity. He paused again, his eyes steady on the jury. Does touching something make you a criminal? Carrington cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, trying to find something to regain control. Jalen wasn't finished. And while we're on the topic, he said, turning toward the judge, let's talk about that fingerprint analysis. Your Honor, was the forensic specialist in this case subpoenaed to testify? Grayson blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated before replying. No. Jalen's lips pressed together. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to convict me, but didn't bother to bring in the person who actually processed that evidence? No chance for me to cross-examine, ask about the chain of custody, or question the accuracy of the analysis. Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen nodded slowly, as if confirming a point he already knew. Interesting. Judge Grayson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case was no longer the easy win he thought it would be. But Jalen wasn't done yet. What came next would change everything. He took a step forward, his voice steady. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Grayson frowned. The owner? Yes, Jalen said. Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi. He provided a statement to the police that, for some reason, was never included in the prosecution's filings. And I think I know why. He turned toward Carrington. Do you recall what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for him to answer. He pulled out a printed transcript from his file and began to read. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen held up the paper. That's from the original police report, the same one the prosecution conveniently ignored. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer left this out of his testimony. The prosecution never mentioned it. And yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, am guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington scrambled forward. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle. But Jalen shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away, from where the vehicle was abandoned. Walking home after grabbing snacks with his friends, Jalen wasn't in the car. He wasn't near it. He wasn't running from anything. The only thing tying him to this case was bad police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was unraveling fast, and everyone could feel it. Jalen turned to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Carrington stiffened, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Grayson exhaled and looked at Jalen, then at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and said the words that would stay with everyone in the room. Case dismissed. A beat of stunned silence. Then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling in their notebooks. Jalen didn't move right away. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone. Judge Grayson, still gripping his gavel, looked at Jalen with an unreadable expression. Something in his eyes hadn't been there before, recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped, but didn't turn. You should consider law school, Grayson said. Jalen smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way outside. The air was thick with voices. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring them. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Denise, waited at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, face unreadable. For a long moment, she just watched him. Finally, she shook her head and exhaled. Boy, you scared me half to death. Jalen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk, Ma. She stared a moment longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. You always were the stubborn one. The cameras kept flashing, but Jalen didn't notice. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Grayson watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was thoughtful, reflective. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. But now he knew he'd remember it. Jalen had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. The lesson was clear. How many other cases had gone this way? How many people had been convicted, not because of evidence, but because of bias, shortcuts, and a system more interested in closing cases than finding the truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back. But what about those who didn't? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in. But next time, he wouldn't be the defendant, he'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be alone. If this story made you think even for a second, share it. The justice system is built on laws, but run by people, and people can change if we demand it. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter, and keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jalen. It might be someone you know.